Hello and welcome everyone. This is Type V3 with a Gunpla review of the 1 to 144th scale, real grade Gundam Astray Red Frame. One of the most popular mobile suits in the franchise history, and for some, the only thing that validates Gundam Seed's existence. Popping the lid off the box reveals a total of 11 items. There's 9 main runners, a daunting decal sheet, and finally a new inner frame molded in red and white ABS plastics. Mind you, despite being new, it doesn't differ all that greatly from the Strike and Destiny frames that preceded it. The build follows the expected real-grade format. Cut out the frame, place armor plates around it, and toss on some stickers mid-assembly. It's pretty straightforward, and no unique building techniques have been implemented. That said, the kit does use some very small parts that can be tough to set in place. This was especially surprising for me as I've never been one to have trouble with small parts. Otherwise, the build process remains a fairly smooth RG experience. The Astray Red Frame makes for one of the best straight-built, real-grade kits. Something that's very apparent about the kit is just the amount of molding and part separation that's gone into it. Despite having a minimal silhouette and sleek proportions, the core of the design is very busy. So much so that the aesthetics may prove to be too overcomplicated for some, and might even deter you from panel lining it. I personally love it. Now, like most RGs, the kit implements multiple shades of the same colored plastics. The Astray has 2 different whites and 2 different reds, though I doubt you'll be able to notice the difference between them. As for gate placement, all the major eyesores on the red and black pieces end up being covered up, making nummark cleanup on the white pieces the main focus. When it comes to decals, there's a lot. In fact, you're given far more than you need, as every section that contains a logo or label also has a variant that completely removes it. So if you detest huge wording plastered all over your giant robots, then you've got that option. As for painting in small details, there's nothing obvious missing, still you may want to highlight some vents and thrusters or even the small mechanical bits. That said, I think a straight assembly with all the decals applied is more than enough for a perfectly presentable kit. Since this is a 1 to 144th scale kit, the red frame isn't going to make for the largest plastic toy. Its height comes in at about the 5-inch mark. However, not being a very heavy-set frame to begin with, it may feel even smaller in hand. Articulation starts with a hinge neck and a ball joint at the top of the neck, so you can get some good range out of it. Looks up pretty good. Down looks pretty good, however, that little chin piece does collide with the top of the collar. Side to side's alright, and you get a minimal amount of tilting. The torso has a waist joint that swings left to right, and then you have a side to side, but there is no real ab crunch. I'm going to show you something very interesting here. When you pull forward on the Gundam to do an ab crunch, the whole thing just pops off. And that's, it feels like a safety reason, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have any sort of waist ab crunch. It's actually built into the waist bracket here. And so to activate this, what you have to do is you take the waist skirt here and you push it up. And the hinge is actually located down there in the bottom of the, I guess, crotch piece. And that's how you get the waist to get the ab crunch. It's a bit out of the box and different, but it works. And I suppose when you take shelf falls, the top popping off is kind of just like a safety precaution. As for the backside, the backpack can tilt back and forth, and you can detach this and move it on its own separate hinge. When it comes to the arms, we'll start with the shoulder pads, and these things can have a little bit of wiggle, and they can go back and forth, but I'll pull them off because they're just connected on that little slot, and I'll show you how this works. Now, this entire arm is a hinge here, and a peg that goes into the arm. This can go back and forth, and you can even, including when this shoulder pad is connected, you can even get the whole thing to come upwards like that. So it's really good in terms of general shoulder range. You do have a bicep swivel, you have a double joint at the elbow, you have a ball jointed wrist, but the wrist itself also has a small little hinge that works outwards as well. And the hands themselves, these are the posable RG hands, and it's nothing you haven't seen before. There's a hinge right at the palm, and then there's the 3 and 1 main fingers, the thumb, and each of them have a built-in knuckle. For the legs, we'll start with hip skirts. Now, the back hip skirts are pretty much static. The sides, you can flip them out and have a little bit of rotation. The front, you can also move on their own separate ball joints. The legs themselves are just a simple universal joint, so there's a back and forward, and there's an in and out. No real it's not really impeded in any direction. The knee joint is double jointed with all these sliding panels that you can just gaze at and really appreciate. It's really cool to see it happen all in motion. The bottom of the foot, like the wrist, there's a joint right here that tilts ever so slightly for the entire ankle. Now the ankle itself is on a ball joint with a hinge, so that gets you good range in all directions, and then the foot has a mid-foot joint and then a little tiny toe joint just for, I guess, smaller, more subtle poses. The Astray is easily the most articulated real-grade Gundam to date. It can hit all the agile poses you'd expect it to. The waist connection is strange, but it works and it's all solidly held together, completely devoid of that finicky model kit-like feeling. The red frame includes a modest amount of accessories. First, let's talk hands. While you do get fists, a left open palm, and 2 different gripping hands, only the posable RG hands have white fingertips. Honestly, they make the fixed posed hands look pedestrian by comparison, and even functionally speaking, I've found that they work just as well. For weapons, we'll start with the basics, the beam sabers. There's 4 hilts altogether, 2 for display on the Gundam's backpack, and 2 with built-in pegs for holding. The matching pair of pink beam effects carry a nice shape. All told, they're simple and effective. Next up is the shield, and it's a fairly basic one at that. Though I was surprised to see the amount of chrome stickers used on the underside. It plugs into the backs of either arm, and the handle can be gripped by the hand. I just wish the shield sat up closer against the arm when connected. Still, it's acceptable for what it is. The Type 71 beam rifle is the red frame's only long-range weapon, and it's not the most complex gun out there. This could have benefited from multiple gray plastics, as the single solid color is pretty basic. Also, if you look close enough, you'll find there's a clear green lens used in the scope. Then there's arguably the only weapon the red frame's actually associated with, the huge Gundam Astray katana. On the whole, it's a fine-looking sword with a chrome blade, but the gold plastic accents look cheap. If there's one thing you're gonna paint on this kit, let it be those pieces. Aside from that, the kit can hold the giant sword surprisingly well. The scabbard can easily store on either of the Gundam's legs too. Additionally, if you don't like the positioning, there's an adapter to store the sword right at the Gundam's hip. Be warned, this position does hinder some leg articulation. Finally, a display base adapter and an unpainted pilot figure round out the accessories. Now, I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm not really the biggest fan of the red frame. Actually, I kind of hate it. I'd probably need a separate video altogether to explain my reasons in full, but I'm admitting to this because these feelings may have affected my final thoughts. Which is this. The real grade Gundam Astray red frame is fantastic. It is another example of how the simpler model kits often make for the best ones. I think it looks outstanding, has a decent feature set, and is completely devoid of the finicky nature of the earlier RG releases. It's got good versatility too. Those who are just looking to straight build and add a few stickers will be satisfied, while more advanced builders will appreciate the extensive parts separation for painting. Of course, the red frame is not the greatest value real grade. Look to the 00 Riser for the RG with the most bang for your buck. That said, I do think it gives a better toy-like experience. Ultimately, the RG Astray red frame is a well-balanced package and a pleasant model kit experience. I don't know if it's the outright top real grade release to date, yet its ability to offer something to builders of all skill levels and interest is what makes this kit worth your time. But that's all for me. Thanks for watching, and at this point I can only assume this won't be the last of the RG Astray. With the Gundam's huge popularity, I imagine we'll soon have a rainbow full of them.